The Bible before the Canon Bible. The story of canon is a hotly disputed topic and changes wildly depending on the sect of Christianity along with the time period in history being discussed. What is not controverted is that the idea of canon Bible did not exist during the early days of Christianity. Because of a lack of canon, many different books were distributed and read by the early Christians. These different books would help establish a canon Bible. But what is canon? Canon can best be understood as the books in the Bible that are considered the most legitimate, and therefore considered to be true as compared to books that are not canon, which are seen as more suspect. However, even today, different sects of Christianity have different ideas on what books are considered canon. English-speaking Protestants, the Latin Vulgate, and the Greek Orthodoxy all use different books and debate on what is canon of the Bible. And even more sects of Christianity consider the other books to be holy, but more suspect. The early Christians did not have the luxury of established books, and the issue of canon had not been decided. The idea of canon did not begin to develop until the 4th century AD with letters of the early church fathers. The road to canon. The concept of canon began to be established with the early church fathers Eusebius, Origen, Metellus, Anthemius, and more, who began to discuss the issue of what should be canon and began developing a short list of books they believed to be the most credible in the 4th century AD. It is important to note that during the time of the early church fathers of the 4th century AD, there was no canon Old Testament, and the topics that would be the canon New Testament was thought to be an extension of the older Jewish stories written in Greek. These stories made up a proto Old Testament known as the Septuagint. The Septuagint is one of the oldest and widely used original Greek translations of the books that would be the Old Testament. The Septuagint was commissioned by Ptolemy II in the 3rd century BC, a little over 200 years before the birth of Jesus. Ptolemy II was pharaoh of Ptolemaic Egypt, and a direct descendant of Ptolemy, one of the generals of Alexander the Great. The Septuagint was translated by 72 representees of the 12 tribes of Israel, 6 from each tribe to translate the law written in ancient Hebrew, which very few people knew how to read, into Koine Greek and Aramaic. When completed, the Septuagint included the majority of books that would become the Old Testament, along with many more books that were taken out. The Septuagint includes 14 additional books along with 2 longer versions of stories that we know today. These additional books include the Prayers of Messiah, 1 Esdras, Tobit, Judith, 1-4 Maccabees, Psalm 151, Wisdom of Solomon, Sirach, Baruch, Letter of Jeremiah, and Psalm of Solomon. The longer versions of books include a longer version of Esher and a longer version of Daniel. These books throughout time were added, taken out of different Bibles at different points in history. The Septuagint was considered the authoritative scriptural source for early Christians for centuries. When the early church fathers of the 4th century began to discuss which letters and books should be seen as most credible, this was in the context of adding these books into these older documents. Learning of the ancient origin of the Septuagint and knowing that the Septuagint was the authoritative source for early Christians, then what happened to it? As the Septuagint was being written in the 3rd century, the Jewish people were still trying to figure out their own issues about which books are to be considered their canon. Their process of deciding what was canon changed and was debated upon for centuries, and over the centuries began to have a final form in 200 AD, nearly 400 years since the start of the discussion. Naturally, over that time period, the final form of canon of the Jewish body of works looked different from the Septuagint written over 400 years earlier. The journey of Jewish canon is important to understand in order to know why the Septuagint was abandoned. In 382 AD, Pope Damasus I requested the biblical historian Jerome to translate the Bible into Latin. which will become known as the Latin Vulgate. Jerome was unique for his time, as he was one of the few church fathers who understood Hebrew. Because of his understanding of Hebrew, he translated the Jewish canon instead of the previously used Septuagint or Vestus Latina, which was based on the Septuagint. As mentioned previously, Jewish canon had drifted away from the Septuagint, and such the official Bible of the Catholic Church at that time became based on Jewish canon of 200 AD, instead of the Septuagint, which Christians had been using for nearly 400 years. The 382 date fits well with when the Catholic Church claims the first decision of canon began, with the 382 AD Council of Rome, which gave a list of books they considered canon. This early decision of canon by the Catholic Church continued, and was finally finished at the Council of Trent, ending in 1563 AD. With this first instance of a decision of a hard canon, many branches of canon will form as different sects of Christianity competed with the Catholic Church. Have you heard of the Septuagint? Is the start date of the Catholic canon correct? Who decided what should be canon and why? Did the Bible change over time? Let me know in the comment section below. And for more Supernatural History TV, like and subscribe.